Hello, Jeando.
Hello, Kevin.
Today, I think we're recording this in the middle of quarantine.
Yeah,
So let's talk about something that people can do at home, some simple experiments they could do. So based on someone who maybe has no experience at all of conscious guidance and control, what's some things they can do to understand the difference between this and their normal habitual way of moving and using themselves?
that's a very interesting topic, but I'm afraid we are going to need to separate this answer into two parts. The reason for that is that the difference between normal exercises that are done according to what people feel, we call that subconscious guidance. Subconscious means that in what you feel and the conception you form about what is nice and what is good is not reasoned. It's just because you feel it's right and you do it. You may be right, you may be wrong. There is no way to know. Yes. Conscious guidance and control is a process where we start to, in fact, reason about the laws and the mechanical principles that are governing human movement. So there is a theoretical part that is absolutely necessary to engage into conscious guidance and control procedures. And that they are procedures, they are not experiment, because we are going to start with a very clear idea of what it is we desire, what it is we control, so that when we are going to perform some experiments, there are experiments, the person will have a theory that I'm going to explain today, and explaining a theory doesn't prove anything. It doesn't demonstrate anything. In order to demonstrate a theory, you have to make an experiment. And so each student, each pupil that is working with conscious guidance and control sessions has, well, the first part, which is the session where the person is film producing experiments, and these are experiments of conscious guidance. We mean by that there are very clear orders of movement that are spelled out. We call them instructions. These or orders. These instructions or orders are, in fact, verbal definition of some aspects of movements. There is never one order at a time. There are always a series of orders. And the person has a series of intentions of moving part one this way, the second part this way, moving the middle part of the torso one way, moving the lower part of the torso the other way, moving the hand and the elbow, for example. And all these intentions are one after the other. So there is memory involved. There is also what we call visuospatial representation. When you say that you want the throat to move forward, well, you have to represent the spot, the bony spot you intend to move, from where to where. There may be also the question of speed that will come into. So the person has to start to realize that we are not going to experiment with movements and feel how it is. No, no, no. We are going to decide a series of intention, and then the experiment is to see on film what has happened. Has the person been able to coordinate the intention on one side and the acts? And we are going to measure the acts and see if they correspond in all aspects with the intentions. Probably not. And that's where things become interesting and where people will understand what we mean by process. A process is a circular system where you have a series of intentions intended to produce a very definite result with the whole self in activity. And then we control whether this geometry of mechanical advantage, which is good for, well, in the principle of movements, has been implemented. When it is not implemented, as I said, then there is a second reasoning that comes in. Let's say, knowing the intention the person had in mind, were they all in mind when she tried and performed the action? Most of the time we will find that no, the person forgot a few things or concentrated on one which made all the other disappear. So the person has to, well, reconsider a way of transforming action, intention into action. Sometimes it's different. Sometimes there is some actions that are not strong enough. They are not appearing on screen, while others are much stronger. It's possible to see that they were all there. The person was able to have all this intention, but well, the habitual one, the one that the person has already trained, were very present, and the new ones, for example, disappeared, or the reverse. The person was so concentrating on the new ones that the old ones suffered from it. And so the person has to reason and to say, well, I need to change my way of projecting the same intentions that I remembered last time. I remembered properly, but the projection, we mean by projection, the transforming an intention, a verbal intention, a verbally defined intention into an action. And so there is a process where every time you make an experiment, well, you can, first of all, know where you are. Have you got a problem of memory, a problem of attention, a problem of projection? That is, how do you need to, well, modify your way of projecting the intention? And there is a last possibility, is that maybe you've reached a stage where you can project, for example, 4 movements, but as soon as you get a 5th one, everything crumbles. You've got to a point where, wow, you're overloading. So then it's necessary to reason about that and to find ways, and most of the time to find ways that we don't hit our head on the wall. I cannot go over this. No, we just change the whole series of instruction, and we start with very different ones to check whether it's related to the particular organization we wanted to create, or whether it's just a cognitive overload that you can manage 4 and not 5. So if that's the case, if it's just a cognitive overload, well, we do train specifically on this until we can see that for, well, something like using words. You can then separate the cognitive from the physical practicalities and work on the cognitive side. And then as soon as you see that on the cognitive side, the person is able to manage 6, 7, 8 different meaning units, well, then you can go back and see if there is any effect on the physical aspects of things. And most of the time there is. So a procedure is just a part of a complex system of inquiry. It's nothing like an exercise that is conceived as to strengthen or to make something more flexible. It's what we are trying to make more flexible is the mind. It's not, well, the body. We are interested in conscious guidance in how we can use our mind in order to change something that appears to be physical at first glance. If a person is able to sit, for example, in a certain way, you will consider without thinking that it's a physical action. Well, of course, it is not. The person has to organize a certain number of movements, and the organization of these movements are done according to laws, which is the intellectual part. And so what I think is that I will treat today the theoretical part. What do we mean by a reorganization or readjustment of the self, of the whole self? And so we mean, of course, as I said, something mental that is going to guide, and also a performance. We want to guide a performance. We don't want to guide a muscle. We want to guide performance. And so today we do the first part, and the second part we do next time. And then I think the simplest way to do the second part is to like give you a small lesson as if you were a beginner, yeah, so that our viewers are going to see what it is to receive a lesson of conscious guidance and control. So that I will show what sort of instruction I want you to perform. You will have to perform them, and then we will analyze your performance. And I will ask you whether you think you can improve on the experiment using the same orders or using different orders. Okay?
Yes, sounds good.
Good. So to start with, we have to discuss the fundamental of human movements. And of course, we have to start with the fundamental for human movement as seen by that very strange man that was Frederick Matthias Alexander. You have to remember that conscious guidance and control, I did not invent. I found it in the books written by the founder of the Alexander technique. So it's necessary to understand mechanical laws, but in the way Alexander viewed them. Alexander was not a scientist, he was a performer, and his interest in human movement was first and foremost how to organize the movement so that he could perform on stage and speak very, very loudly, because it was a time where there were no microphones. People had really to project their voices. So he wanted to, in fact, see if through a gestural reeducation, he could move better. But also something that is very important is to function better. So in his idea, there is the center is conscious control. And it's not something I invented. It was already in the Alexander technique conception as viewed by Alexander himself. Today, the conscious guidance and control has mostly disappeared from the modern Alexander technique. So we have to go back to the books. That's what I propose first we do, because in order to discuss sensibly about mechanical laws applied to human movement, we have to make sure that we agree on the words, on the meaning of the word we use. For example, there is a fundamental word, it's a mechanism of the torso, the conscious guidance and control of the mechanism of the torso. And it's necessary to first develop a little bit and explain what it is we understand when Alexander explained the center, the core of his technique. That's what I want to do now. Okay, so I will share first a screen. And we will see that's a sentence written in the first book. It's called Man's Supreme Inheritance. So in this sentence, he explained that the conscious guidance and control is on a wide and general and not on a specific basis. He said that applied conscious control on a specific basis is completely unthinkable. And we have to first understand how to apply the principle as a universal. So at first you think, wow, what is this all about? What it means? Well, he explained simply that the conscious controlling of a particular muscle, of a particular movement, of a particular limb, like athletes and sportsmen would practice, is of little practical value in the sense of living. So we don't want to learn to control very well one movement or one part, one region. Alexander then starts with this idea that if we want to obtain control over parts, so he says a specific control of the finger, of the neck, or the legs, should primarily be the result of the conscious guidance and control of the mechanism of the torso. And he says particularly of the antagonistic muscular actions, which brings about those correct and greater coordination intended to control the movements of the limb, neck, respiratory mechanism, and the general activity of the internal organs. I will stop a second on that because there are many words there that require at least some light and explanation so that we start to understand what we are going to work with when we do experiments of conscious guidance and control. So the first word that I will discuss is, of course, mechanism of the torso, but that is relatively simple. What is more important here is what it is we want to create with the different movements of the part of the mechanism of the torso. And according to Alexander, he's talking about antagonistic muscular action. Very often it's called antagonistic actions. And we will see that the word muscular doesn't mean at all what we think nowadays in the 21st century. So there are antagonistic muscular action that are, in fact, the result of the different adjustments of the movements of the parts of the mechanism of the torso. From there, you're not well advanced because I don't think you can. When I started to read Alexander and I translated these parts, this sentence, I could just translate the words, like word for word. This is not accepted way of translating a book. You are required to understand what it is you are translating. Otherwise, it's like you're not doing your job. So how can we understand that? So I have changed image now. You should see now not a sentence but diagram. Is that correct? Okay. So there are two diagrams here, and the first one is the bony parts that Alexander has pointed out as constructing what he called the mechanism of the torso. So by mechanism, we mean a movable structure where the movements are defining the functions. And more than defining with the human structure, it's absolutely clear that the movements of the parts are going to, in fact, impair or enhance the function like breathing, of course, digesting, and we will see also the functions of movements. We will see that all the muscles of the limbs that are required for gestures and movements and any exercise, all these parts originate from the center, what's in the Delsart system, which is the torso. There is all these diagrams, not only the bones, is the pelvis, the upper cavity with the thorax, there is the spine, but there are also dots that you can see here. Dots are used in the system of guidance to act or the mind, and what are going off the agent that that the teacher will formulate for the pupil and try to perform all together. So we can define the top of the tray. There are 5 red dots, and these red dots, in fact, represent the whole plane of the toe. These dots are found on bony parts that are on a tall plane. there are also two spots that are not the frontal. They are on the left of the pit, on the side of the rib cage. Also, there are two other spots related that are not on the front plane. They are on the same plane normally when we are in full extension as the ribs at the back of the armpit. In the head posture are the CTs. So during a lesson, what I will do with the pupil is first to help the pupil localize and find where these spots are on the anatomical structure. It's absolutely when we want just a simple lesson, it's not as it sounds, because we will need the person to be able to locate the spots we want to move in space to create a new geometry. Why are we going to create a new geometry? Of course, a beautiful expansion of the torso that we need. It's better for testing, and we will also mental for creating a solid equilibrium. Fine. But why? What is Alexander's point? He says that through conscious control of the mechanism of the torso, we are able, in fact, to recruit something he called antagonistic actions. We can create, antagonistic action. And in other parts of his books, he talks about antagonistic pools. So I want to explain both words, antagonistic action and antagonistic pools. The second image is the torso seen from the back, but there is not only the bone this time. You see that there are gray tissues. Well, they normally are shown in red, but there are muscles. And there is also different blue structures. And these ones are very interesting to understand antagonistic action and antagonistic pools. What are antagonistic actions? Antagonistic actions are movement of different parts, one relative to the other. These movements will create lengthening. We create a geometrical, in fact, action on the blue structure see on the right. These blue structures are what we call connective tissues. Very interesting material. These are not muscles. You can see that the muscles are in fact not connected to the bones directly. The muscles are all connected, first of all, to this tissue. And that tissue has mechanical properties that are absolutely astonishing. What we call biomechanical springs. If you pull on them, if you create deformation in the sense of their length, well, and exactly as a spring, they are going to produce an elastic resistance of enormous power. That's the thing that certainly discovered, is that instead of using muscle to produce every single movement, so you use muscle traction, which tends to, in fact, compact and close the structure and shorten the structure. He found another way that he called antagonistic actions. And when he says antagonistic muscular action, you have to understand that in his mind, he's not an anatomist, he's not a physiologist talking of a muscle or something that is a muscle. We know that a muscle in itself that produce any action the bone if it's not related to the bone by connective tissues, by tendon first, and even on top of the tendon is also all the fascia, which is the fascia that is interpenetrate all muscles and allow the muscle to transmit the action to the bones. Even muscles, when they are lengthening, are also becoming springs, becoming elastics. The advantage of springs is that if you have created by an indirect action, well, indirect acts, two actions, you have created a stretch, a mechanical deformation in the sense of length, in the direction of length, well, then that tissue is going to create an antagonistic response that is absolutely not costly for you, because it's not like a muscle where you need to produce an energy and spend energy in order for the muscle to create the pool. No, a spring by design is just one stretch will pull, will maintain structure in the way they should be used with no effort on your part. You can, for example, stay sitting for hours and hours without tiring, without, well, like people say, feeling any pain or itch anywhere. This is what we call the antagonistic pulls. Antagonistic pulls are the result of the movement you've made to, in fact, stretch the fascia. So when Alexander is talking of the conscious guidance and control of the mechanism of the torso, there is a goal. There is a desired result that we want to produce. It's an indirect action. We are not moving parts for obtaining an external result. No, it's a primary action of, in fact, making sure that the antagonistic pools are going to work for us. And so when you look at the structure is flat, of course, but it's important to realize, for example, here we have the thoracolumbar fascia. It's the fascia, enormous structure that is in fact close to the bones as different level. And you can see the large of the erector spinae group and the multifidus, all these big strong muscles on both sides of the vertebral column. These muscles, in fact, if you look at it, you will find that they are, in fact, enclosed into the fascia. So it's clear that if you can control in muscle abdomen at the front, because they are related to that fascia directly, you will see that you can control many other muscles, notably those of the back. So Alexander is always pointing to that fact that we need to control, in fact, the mechanism torso or the lengthen and widen the back. And so there is an explanation of lengthening that comes to mind immediately. Of course, if you contract, you're going to increase the intra-abdominal pressure, and it's going to be difficult. There's no explanation of widening the back. Why are we so interested in widening the back? When you look at fascia, you can start to have an idea. When you look at it, you will see that there are dots. These dots, in the scientific representation, have a meaning. They represent, in fact, the reinforced elastic fibers. The tissue is already elastic, but there is also, it's strengthened by fibers that are even more elastic. That's what we see. And what we see that if you look at the top, you will see that only one direction. These fibers are reinforced in one direction. Look at the thoracolumbar fascia, the lower back, you will find something quite strange, is that here there are two directions of fascia, are bidirectional, they are crossed. What it means is that this fascia has mechanical property in the up and down orientation, and also horizontal orientation. And that is very important to understand. Why is it that we are going to want to widen the back all the time? You will find so in the future that, for example, if we start next time to ask movement for the wrist, so we have an idea is that the whole girdle, the arm and shoulder blade, that's the shade we see here, are in fact related directly to the widening of the back. Because when this, we are going to and in the back, going to try and bring the elbows forward, and you will find that when we do that, there is a definite movement of the shoulder blade that is going in. It's going to go away from the center line. Going away from the center line is called widening. But also, we will see the arm is related to the fascia directly by an enormous muscle, that is the latissimus dorsi. And when we're going to use the arm, we are going to have a direct effect on the back. And if the arm goes forward with the upper torso while goes back, well, we have what we call antagonistic action. If there is antagonistic action, there is creation of a passive antagonistic pull. So that when we widen, for example, the upper back, we are going to widen the leg and we are going to strengthen the upright capacity of the structure to resist collapse. So we are not going to organize the torso, keep the torso set by some sort of muscular action. Not at all. What we teach people is to start and organize the movement so as to be supported by a passive structure. So that once they have done their readjustment, then they are set. The work of maintaining the expansion of the torso is going to be done passively by a structure that only strengthens the more you use it. Time is going to be of the essence. The more you work at, you get an interaction to, in fact, create an antagonistic action between two bony parts. Knowing what you do is going to, in fact, reinforce that passive structure of coordinated support. So the more you add it, the more it's going to work for you. So that is very important to understand. I've here changed the diagram. Complex, see, it's easy to understand. Here is a test, a repeated test of and we see that what we call strain in technical terms is the amount of stretch you have produced with the antagonistic actions of the different bony parts. So when you stretch the structure, we see the load the structure is capable of maintaining. And we see that when we start, we repeat an experiment, and we repeat an experiment where we do stretch that structure. I will show you very simple ways to stretch the structure and very simple ways also to see how much the structure is capable of supporting as load, yes, before it collapses. So we see that during the first test, well, the tissue was capable of maintaining a load of like a little bit more than 10 Newton. While when we continue the test, we stop for a moment and start again. Each time you see a curve, it's one test. Yes, so we see, there is a second bout of test, and during the second bout of test, is exactly the same. We are not trying to stretch more. We are stretching exactly the same. The antagonistic actions are exactly the same. Well, response, the antagonistic pulls that the structure is capable of maintaining has tripled. And then we continue and 4 times more. And so you understand in this way that this structure will respond to work if you apply correct directions of stretch. So directions of stretch is going fundamental in all the conscious guidance and control experiment. I'm going to ask the pupil, for example, you next time, to produce. We're going to be very, very precise about directions of stretch. We want to make absolutely sure that you're going to, in fact, enhance the capacity, the passive capacity of the structure to maintain the whole torso and more, because if you look at that image of the torso, you will find that, of course, the thoracolumbar fascia is connected to torso, but also to the neck and the head, and also with all the system, mechanical system of the legs. So any, for example, you just want to walk better, or you want to climb hills, or you want to play the piano or the violin, or you want to sing better, you will find that you first of all to reorganize the movements of the different parts of the torso in order to create the antagonistic action in the direction, so that antagonistic pulls are going to play for you. They're going to enter into action all the time without you doing any sort of muscular effort. So when you know this idea, then it's interesting to look at what is Alexander's performance. What was he teaching to his pupils? Was it anything compatible with this view that is exposed verbally in his books? And so here is another picture where there are a few. First one, I'm pointing to him at the moment, is that's Frederick Matthias Alexander, and he's got a shape that is unmistakable. We see back is very far back. When I say back, I say thoracolumbar junction is very far back and very far away from the upper torso all the time. And we see that he taught his pupil, that's Trevelyan. I think in England they call him Sir Trevelyan, and we see that is exact the same form of torso, and the angle is not the same, but the geometrical characteristics are exactly the same. There are no much of the lower and middle torso, and we see that the upper torso has been put forward, so that weight of the upper torso is like stretching even more, because it's not in the same shape. Charles Neal. So Charles Neal here, I took that from a film he made in 1955, I think, just demonstrating various activities in the garden. Here he's mowing he's showing a gardener how to, in fact, produce strong activity, yes, and keeping the antagonistic actions so that the antagonistic pulls are, well, produced for him. And again, we see same shape that you will see I could only explain by looking at the Delsart system. Why that under considers that lengthening and widening the back correspond to that shape. Very quickly after this period, and we see here a picture of Patrick MacDonald, that conception started to, well, change first and completely degenerate, so that nowadays we don't see these pictures. We don't see these antagonistic actions produced by the teacher of the modern Alexander technique. It has disappeared. So when you look at a person in action, so very interesting to connect what we see and what Alexander describes. So he doesn't really, Alexander is very good at criticizing in writing, he explained very clearly what are the aspects that we should look for when we practice an experiment of conscious guidance and control. Are we, in fact, performing the antagonistic action in the direction or not? And it's quite interesting to know what is wrong, to know what is the wrong direction of antagonistic action. So it's in the standing walking position. So that's the first that is really funny, because you will accept very readily that a standing position is you can imagine easily. But a walking position is something quite new. Well, it was very new for me. I was translating to say, walking position? Walking is moving. Walking is locomotion. It's movement. Normally, we have a tendency to see on one side what we call position, static, and walking, movement. We use the two. Alexander does not. Alexander could see the shape of the torso of the person when the person was standing, and he could see also the shape and geometry, which was indicating whether there was antagonistic action, stretch of the tissues of the back or not. And well, if they are not, the hips are held too far forward. So Alexander is not a scientist. He has a very loose language of geometry. So for example, the hips are held too far forward, and it doesn't mention forward what. They are just too forward in the absolute. Of course, it's not the case. The hips are too far forward from the pivot. You know, the pivot is the angle, and the hips are very far forward of the pivot, and also the hips are very far forward of the top of the torso. When that is the case, the of the torso from the hips is armfully inclined backward. The top of the torso is compensating middle torso being too far forward. And what is the outcome in terms of antagonistic pools? Well, there is no antagonistic pools in these pictures. Why? Well, it's because very simply, there is no stretch of the middle torso in this way. The torso is shortened, and on top, all stretch that could come from the arms and from the legs are absent, because there is no pull from the middle torso because they are close together. So we can very quickly observe, we say control, whether geometry of antagonistic action is present or not. From the geometry, we can, in fact, infer what is the capacity of the person of using the antagonistic pools. As there is no antagonistic pools, the person is not using them. So she's blocking her ribcage in order to lay hands. That's what we call control phase. There is something you must understand about these fascia that are here represented. They are bidirectional action. Is that the geometry of stretch is something strange, is something that has been well studied. We know scientifically exactly what is the mechanism of stretch. Of course, through the mechanism of stretch, we can calculate what is the antagonistic resistance that the tissue is going to offer to the person that knows how to direct the antagonistic actions. So here we have a new image on it's a mechanical test that is applied to an elastic tube. And Alexander compares the mechanism of the torso with an elastic tube, rigid oblong bag. So when a tissue is tubular is stretch. You apply a mechanical action on both extremities. In order to obtain stretch, you need at least 2 opposite actions. It's impossible to obtain stretch by pulling on one side, because if you pull on one side and the other one is not pulled the other way, it's not going to stretch. So when we stretch vertically, the tube is in position, standing position, or the sitting position. Your thoracic and pelvic parts, and you've got this system. You will find that geometrically, some things happen all the time. Is that the center is going to narrow. It's any elastic structure that you pull, you will find that the same geometrical deformation is applied and is associated with the stretch, with the antagonistic resistance that this structure is capable of producing. So the question arises, what would happen? I've shown a second pic that it could be possible to apply a stretch, but on the horizontal direction. If you decide I'm going to widen that tissular, that biomechanical system. Well, I ask you the question, imagine we can attain a certain distance when we stretch vertically. What would be the case if we were not only stretching vertically, but before that, we stood too wide? Do you think the elastic resistance would augment or decrease? You have to think, you have to give me an answer.
Can you repeat the question, please, Jeando?
Yes, the question is, I understand this comes as a surprise. I never told you I was going to ask you a question like during a lesson. We have a tube, an elastic tube, and we stretch vertically. And it's, of course, producing an elastic resistance. That's the blue action. The antagonistic pull is the blue action that is, in fact, applying on the mechanical system of stretch. Okay. Next is a second image. We have the same stretch vertically, but before that, we start to widen the tissues of the tube. Do you think that my blue arrow is correct? Because the blue arrow in the second image has increased relatively to that one. Well, the theory that I'm saying that if you do widen the middle, which is that horizontal down, then we will get a stronger antagonistic resistance to the antagonistic action of the design of this move here. Do you understand the question?
Yes, I think it'll be correct as long as the 4 different movements are happening at the same time.
Yes, that's correct. So we see the purpose of a bidirectional elastic spring. If you are able to widen, you will increase the vertical antagonistic resistance. That's why we always insist that we, in fact, analyze the structure and create tensions of movements that are going to not only, well, of course, create an antagonistic action so that the person is going to also very tall, but we want that. That is not sufficient in itself. We want also absolutely to find all the possible, the means possible to in fact create antagonistic actions that are going to widen. And we found that when the pupil understand what it is we are after, why it is we ask the person to do certain things, much easier for the person to, in fact, engage in experimenting herself. Of course, when I ask the person to produce a certain action according to verbal orders, the person will do so. But that is not interesting. That is just the session. What are interesting is, in fact, explaining how to conduct the experiment to the pupil, so that the pupil can conduct experiment at home when we are not there. Well, the psychological rule is, if the person doesn't understand why and where we are these experiments, the person will not produce the experiment at home. So I understand it takes a long time to explain this thing, but we are working, well, I am working only with intelligent persons that can understand these things, and when they do, they change their behavior. They start to experiment themselves. So now, let's go to a very strange idea of lengthening and widening the back. These three persons here are really exact in their ways of lengthening and widening. And so at first, I thought that this was invented by Frederick Matthias. Alexander was the inventor. It was of course, I was a teacher of the Alexander technique. The books are written by this man, so he's never really explained geometry. There are a few hints that the upper torso should be forward, that the back should be back. Well, with that, not going very far. So first of all, I started to try and find an explanation for the shape, and also more important than the explanation for me was find the means of experimenting with that shape, how you produce shape. I finished my training as modern Alexander teacher. I was nowhere near that shape. Of course, I was much closer to the shape of the modern Alexander. And so that has started the interest inquiry. And I found that, of course, it was possible to obtain the shape and to, in fact, conceive some movements that are very definite. And it's very simple. I found that it was necessary to obtain the flat back and the upper torso forward with at the top, very, very unmistakable. Yes? Well, there was a solution. The solution was to create a frontal plane of the torso. What I mean by that is there are these spots on the torso that I showed earlier, and I found that if I could place all the spots of the frontal parts of the torso at the equal distance from a wall, that means that they are vertical, then I would immediately obtain the same shape as Alexander in the his first teachers, the teachers of very first year before Pat McDonald and Marjorie Barlow started. And so, very simple, I said, wow, that's funny. Why Alexander could have maybe not made this, because drawing is a computer, but the idea is easy to represent even verbally. By the way, I want to stress one, because communication with different people having watching these images, having all the spots, the 5 that are on the frontal part of the torso on the same plane, can be done more or less by just rulers and seeing the rulers at against the same wall. But it's never perfect. To have it perfect, there is something is necessary. It's really necessary from the habitual way of using the ribs, movements. It's absolutely necessary. There are 2 moves that are absolutely necessary. Is that the upper part of the torso has to move forward, of course, but it has to rotate. So those up. In the same way, the 8th rib, rib number 8, the rib number 8 spot that you see in here, will not match the frontal plane if you can't at the same time lift it. So bringing that rebate back is certainly not enough. well, most of the time, we will find that the people have the rebate far forward and the too far back. Yes, it's a habit that all people have. They shorten the back as a rule. They don't use the thoracical lumbar elastic spring. They don't. They cannot use it. They cannot even imagine how it would be to use it because their hands is opposite to it. They've never done it. And they have repeated experiences when they, for example, when they rest. You look at people when they rest, and you look at the geometry of their torso when they rest. You will find that they are always collapsing. So they collapse, they never stretch the fascia at the back. Well, let alone speaking about widening. Widening is like hidden. I don't know. It's socially. It's a socially forbidden combination of acts. Look around. You look at people. I'm not going to show many pictures because I don't want to point the fingers. It's just the start the work. Start the work. Everybody start the work in the same way because we all shorten and especially narrow. So in order for the rebate to be on the same plane as the iliac, the front of the pelvis spot, it's absolutely necessary, of course, to movement going forward for the throat and going back for the ribs to be on the same vertical line, but that's not sufficient. It's necessary also to find the whereby you can also bring them upward so that they are exactly and perfectly on the same plane. Otherwise, it's not perfect. So the question is, yes, fine. Now I've found this, and Alexander was a genius. How could he find this? Well, maybe he could. Maybe he found it somewhere else. What we see here is a Greek sculpture. And that Greek, how do I found that Greek sculpture? Because Delsart said that the criterion for the harmonic expansion of the torso, he found. He didn't invent. He said he found. And he doesn't explain exactly where he found it, but he said he studied Greek sculpture 15 years. And the criterion is there. And we see on this picture that there are spots of the plane of the torso, the throat, the rebate, the iliac, the anterior superior iliac crest, they're all there. And the shape of the torso from the front will not attract the attention of people. But you have to understand that if you want to create that same shape, place these spots, the red spots on the same vertical 2D surface, you can easily, during a session, you easily use rulers, wooden rulers. I do that all the time, so that the person will know what it is we are after. And so when you look at the person from side, wow, you get a picture. I'm going to show you the kind of, well, it's not a really nice taken film. And there is an old gentleman that is, in fact, shaping the torso of the student that is in. And we see the same shape appear. And that is a picture when Alexander it's 4 years before his death. It's his life. It's certainly the end of his teaching life. And we see that at the end of the teaching life, he was just posturing people in this way with a flat lower back and a great hump. Always the same idea. So this idea find in the Delsart system, the socially acceptable way of using the parts of the movements of the part. So on the left, we see the protruding abdomen, we see the upper torso brought back in space, we see the arch back, the protruding shoulder blades at the back. That you know, we know that. But what is interesting is the one on the right. The right, the new vision, we see that the lower part and middle part of the torso are absolutely back, and the upper part of the torso, of course, brought forward. As a result, there is a widening. You see, when the shoulders are back, they are very close to the spine. There is a narrowing, and also the arms that are attached to the thoracolumbar fascia, the latissimus dorsi. The latissimus dorsi here is not working, it's too short. While here, we see that the upper part of the arm has been brought forward. There is enormous widening of the upper part of the arm. And from that geometry, you can easily realize that the latissimus dorsi is really in the lower. So from that, we have now everything we need. Well, apart, I need to explain how we find the spots next time to, well, start, well, really, what is a session of conscious guidance and how we produce the control, the visual measurements that are going to tell us whether, as a result of the movement you perform, whether we have more action, which agonistic action on the elastic systems, and from that infer whether there is more antagonistic will produce help you maintain the parts in the way they should be used. So it's before starting to understand that there was not one moment where I mentioned the word feel. There is no interest in the somatic system of teaching. We were feeling, are you feeling better? When you moved in that way, do you feel how it's rotating? Do you feel this or do you? No, we are interested. There are very, very few muscle spindles in the elastic system of the structure. The structure is full of elastic systems. We nearly don't feel them. What we feel is how some tendons or some muscle are changed from their habitual use, but we have no feeling of the important thing, which are antagonistic pulls. We can feel it if our widening and lengthening the torso by the different moves in correct direction. Well, yes, you will find that suddenly you breathe better, suddenly you can rotate rhythm in the arms, in the neck. Yes, but these are just side effects, after effects, you would see. After can help you. Well, what I mean by that is that if you have felt these effects time and time again, does not you better at producing the actions that are necessary to produce these effects. So important to understand this major difference between any sort of movement and a conscious guidance approach to movement. For example, when very often the pupil, they say, wow, I feel this when I produce movement. When I stay, and so what? Yes, I feel that. Yeah, and no, and the result of the action, the end, is of no interest. You cannot guide these antagonistic movements to create the antagonistic action we want in order to obtain the antagonistic pulls that are going to access the mechanism. Well, I understand it's a bit long, but it's a good introduction to time. You are not too tired to follow how we are going to enter into action. Any question?
Excellent, Jeando. So that's a good explanation of the theory that we need to know for the procedures that I'm going to do following your instructions in the next video, and it will give people an idea of what it is we're actually talking about here, and people will be able to see where I go wrong, what I get right, and then we can analyze the results, and then what we would do to improve them, because it's exactly what everyone else will need to do to improve their own situation anyway. So thank
Exactly.
you.
Yes, you're welcome. Thank you.
We'll see everyone next week, where we'll be doing a practical experiment with me as the subject. And we, if you're watching the video, check out the show notes underneath for the links to Jeando's videos. And we'll see you next week. Thank you, Jeando.
Good confinement.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye-bye.